Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box. And you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Friday, July 5th, and Dennis and I are both here along with 20 fingers. It was a successful 4th of July, both for Dennis and for myself. Dennis, how did you celebrate yesterday?
I stayed away. It was glorious. We let the kids hop on the bikes. They went downtown, rode around. We swung out after fireworks, picked them up, threw the bikes in the back of the truck. You know, I mean, we went and got ice cream before we picked them up. But, you know, yeah. Other than that, that was the highlight of my 4th of July.
Well, so I usually have, provided we have not been so dry that we're under fire restrictions where I live, which was not the case this year. There's usually 3 things I like to do on the 4th of July, which I did yesterday. I watched the hot dog eating contest from Coney Island, which honestly was a little bit like watching the Broncos post Peyton Manning. They were still playing the game, but it was not in an elite level. It was more like watching a Trevor Siemian 13-10 loss than it was. Although the winner did manage to eat 58 hot dogs and buns in 10 minutes, which feels like a lot.
It does. Who was that?
Patrick Bertoletti out of Chicago, Illinois. Meanwhile, I guess Joey Chestnut, who's won 16 out of the 17 years, but got DQ'd from the competition this year for reasons I still don't understand, had his own hot dog eating competition and managed to eat 57 hot dogs and buns in 5 minutes on his YouTube feed, which I probably should have tried to find. My other thing, I always love to watch Jaws. I watch that every year on 4th of July. So I watch that in the middle of the day in between cleaning and food prep. Is
Jaws a 4th of July movie like Die Hard is a Christmas movie?
Yeah, probably a little bit. It's set in the summer. Part of the movie does take place on 4th of July. It's always usually Shark Week near the beginning of July too. There are really no bad shark movies. There are shark movies that are better than others, and Jaws really the gold standard, not only of shark movies, but of cinema. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I told Lindsay, I was thinking about it. I still own it on VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, digital download, and I have the paperback. So,
So you're a fan, is what I'm hearing.
I am a fan. So I watched that. That was fun. And then in our neighborhood, we're just outside the city limits of Colorado Springs, so Safe and Sane fireworks are legal. We're also right by the Army base, and they are not really concerning themselves with which type of fireworks are legal, the rest of our neighborhood. So we had some friends over. I barbecued. We did our little ones, between 8 and 8:45, then moved to the back deck and just watched the chaos.
Watch government issue fireworks.
I mean, they're just exploding mortars everywhere. It's shaking the foundations of the house. My cat does not appreciate it, so we made sure to seal up our bedroom. I was less enthusiastic going on like hour 4. When it got to be like 11:30, 12, I was like, okay, I've had enough patriotism, but we always invite people to come watch. I've told people it's the best fireworks show I've ever seen, and I don't have to leave my house because you just have all these houses all around that are all pretty much competing, shooting huge area. It's the kind where you feel it before you ever see it or hear it. And that's how you know they're good, because you feel a rumble and you're like, oh, somebody just put something in the air. Just got to
Right.
look around. So it was a lot of fun. I'm hoping tonight they start scaling it back, because we had little dribbles of it since last Sunday, and I'm much like my cat. I'm about ready for it to be over.
Well, shedding a little light on my past, fireworks don't quite have the same, effect on me since I stopped taking acid.
Well, people may want to imbibe in something to be able to watch the first of the two teams that we're going to talk about today as we continue our preview of the AFC North. One of these teams, I'm sure, will produce some good fireworks as long as they stay healthy. The other one, more of a question. And we start with that team that is more of a question, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They finished third in the AFC North last year, but 10-7, made the playoffs, lost to the Bills in the wild card round. Still have never had a season where they finished below 500 with Mike Tomlin as coach. He's still there. He re-upped, but they made some wholesale and sweeping changes on offense. Gone are all three quarterbacks that were rostered last year: Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Mitch Trubisky. None of them projected to be a starter, all of them going to be backups in Philadelphia, Tennessee, and Buffalo, respectively. Star wide receiver Deontay Johnson was traded to the Carolina Panthers. Allen Robinson did not work out there, was released, and now I believe is on the Giants. They brought in a new offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith, who was previously the Falcons head coach. Before that was Titans offensive coordinator, which we think could mean good things for the running game. Hard to tell what it's going to mean for the passing game. They brought in two quarterbacks. Russell Wilson came over in free agency after being released from Denver. They traded a pretty low barrier trade to get Justin Fields. So those guys will be competing. They added Cordero Patterson, a veteran in the running back room. They added Van Jefferson, a veteran in the wide receiver room. They added linebacker Patrick Queen, who played for the Baltimore Ravens. In the draft, they worked on the offensive line, grabbing Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier at guard. And they also drafted wide receiver Roman Wilson out of Michigan. Last year's fantasy finishes: Kenny Pickett was QB 31, Mitch Trubisky was QB 46, Mason Rudolph, who actually finished the season pretty strong and got them to the playoffs, was QB 47. For comparison, Wilson was QB 14 in Denver, Justin Fields QB 18 in Chicago. In the backfield, Jaylen Warren finished as running back 22, Najee Harris as running back 23. They were both pretty close together. Among wide receivers, George Pickens finished as wide receiver 25. Deontay Johnson was wide receiver 45. He did miss some time last year. Pat Freiermuth also missed plenty of time, finished as tight end 30. Dennis, we were often frustrated with the offensive weapons, particularly in the passing game for Arthur Smith while he was in Atlanta. Now we have some questions at quarterback. We have some questions beyond Pickens on the wide receiver depth chart. How are you feeling about the Steelers for fantasy?
It feels like a narrow funnel. It feels like it's going to be George Pickens at wide receiver. I think Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren both play a lot and get a good amount of touches. We saw Arthur Smith's willingness to use, as much as I like him, a marginal talent in Tyler Algier when he had Bijan Robinson. I think Harris, he's still got some left in the tank, but he doesn't have elite breakaway speed or elite elusiveness. He's just a good back, a big back, a volume back. Jaylen Warren will cut into that volume. Warren is a better receiver, though Harris is fine, but Warren is a bit shiftier out of the backfield. The quarterback position is weird because we want to believe Russell's still got plenty left in the tank, but it didn't look good in Denver. Justin Fields, as much as I like him, by all intents and purposes, is a reclamation project. And he's not under contract past this year. I'm not sure that either of these quarterbacks is the quarterback of the future. It's great that they invested 2 picks in the offensive line. They invested a pick last year, first round pick. They're putting some capital there, and that's going to be important. I did like the pick of linebacker Peyton Wilson. He's currently slotted in behind Landon Roberts on the defense, but he could, if he'd have been a much higher draft pick if he could have stayed healthy in college. From an IDP perspective, he could be a guy that racks up a lot of points if he can get on and stay on the field. The wide receivers, my fear, I have a fear there, and that fear is that Arthur Smith is going to look over at Van Johnson and go, "You're my guy from Atlanta. I'm going to throw the ball to you a lot because you're my guy from Atlanta." And it's just, you're muted.
He didn't really throw it to him when he was in Atlanta. So
I get it. I get that. But neither one of them are in Atlanta now. And they'll be like, well, I'll show them. I'm going to throw it to you. Pickens, I think, needs to take a step. He needs to show he can be consistently elite rather than just make spectacular catches occasionally. He needs to do all the right things and keep his head on his shoulders. We've seen it time and time again. The Steelers know when to get out of the wide receiver business. So I'm curious what's going to happen with Deontay Johnson in Carolina. I like him. I think he's great. But also I think Roman Wilson is just about a clone of him and should be able to step right in the slot. I was a little bit surprised that if you look over at the R-Lad scouting or the R-Lad's depth chart, they've got Calvin Austin, whom they reportedly love, who's 5'7" or 5'8", listed as the backup to Pickens. I would think that he's more of a slot guy myself, but I don't know. Outside of Pickens and Roman Wilson, I don't think I'm investing too much in any of the wide receivers in Pittsburgh, and I don't have real high hopes for Roman Wilson this year. I think Pickens will be at least a wide receiver 2. I think he's going to be a top 24 just because he's the game now. And if Russell is the quarterback, he's a much more accomplished passer than Fields is. I think he'll work to get the ball downfield, make it work. But, if I'm the guy I want at cost on this offense is probably Najee Harris.
yeah, it's so there's only a couple I'm feeling good about for redraft, and really there's only a couple you feel good about in Dynasty. Roman Wilson is a guy I'm picking up in Dynasty, and I think could end up being better. But I'm like you, I in Atlanta, we only occasionally got good games from Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And I probably, from a talent standpoint, like both those guys at their position more than Pickens and Freiermuth. So, but beyond that, who was really the wide receiver 2 that you were throwing in a lineup in Atlanta when Arthur Smith was there? There wasn't really one. And when he was running the offense in Tennessee, they, AJ Brown, we know, is a pretty elite talent. He managed to make pretty strong fantasy contributions on not the greatest volume in that offense. So I think Pickens, my one concern, I'm kind of like you. I feel like he's going to end up in the wide receiver 2 range. He was just on the cusp of it last year, is that sometimes he has not demonstrated that he's as great maximizing his volume in the past. Hopefully see like a catch percentage step up might help. I do like Freiermuth. He's shown himself to be a decent weapon in the red zone. I think he could be decent, but Roman Wilson, I'm holding him in Dynasty, but I'm not expecting a lot. I think the backs, I think you're right, both of them will play. It feels like they might split enough that last year they were real close in the final standings, one position apart. I still think Harris might finish as the higher of them, but I have them both in that 20 to 30 range, kind of tightly packed together. Quarterback, I've come around. I think they are going to want to get a look at Fields in some way, or they're going to mix in and do packages. I mean, one thing we definitely saw from Arthur Smith in Atlanta was pretty quick to rotate when he didn't think he was getting what he wanted. And it's not like Pittsburgh didn't use 3 quarterbacks last year when they were not particularly satisfied. I still think Pittsburgh probably finishes between 8 and 10 wins, but that's more of a credit to the defense than how bullish I am on this offense. I think in redraft, I would take, Harrison, Warren, Pickens, and Freiermuth. I don't know, even in redraft Superflex, how bullish I would be about having to start Wilson or Fields on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I'm not keen on the quarterbacks. To me, they're both ideal. Like, I think Wilson's like your QB3 on your dynasty team. Fields is a QB4, and you're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with him. Freiermuth, I haven't seen enough consistency from him to think that he's going to be relevant at any higher than a tight end too.
Yeah, I kind of have him in the 13 to 15 range.
And I feel like even that's pushing it. So I don't know. I'm a little wary of him. I feel like second year of Darnell Washington, there'll be some, wow, this guy is so big and athletic, let's get him the ball kind of approach to things.
We shall see. So how do you have the Steelers finishing?
I have the Steelers handing Mike Tomlin his first losing record of his career at 7-10. I think that they're going through a lot of changes. They're going to be ultra conservative, which means they will, not be getting any leads. They've got 2 reclamation project quarterbacks, and that's a gamble in and of itself. A new offensive coordinator. I think it's, as much as I want to go, it's the Tomlin mystique. I just, when I was going through, I could probably go through and swap a couple more and get them to, 9 and 8. But I felt like,
I mean, it's got to end sometime, right?
Theoretically.
It does feel like this would be as good a chance as any. I like I said on Tuesday, I like the AFC North enough that I have all the teams finishing over 500. I had them right there at 9 and 8, but I did not have them making the playoffs. I like this defense. I like what they've done. Obviously, they worked on the extension for Mike Tomlin, so we know he's going to be there for a while. But I think they're lacking. What?
As he should be.
I think they're lacking an offensive identity, and I don't know that the pieces they've assembled so far will give them that identity. It does feel like with bringing in Arthur Smith and working on the line, they might be trying to move back to what they were, what they have historically been, which is a real hard-driving rush offense. Can we see Harris go back to the potential we thought he had when he came out, and maybe what we saw from him in his rookie year? What role does Warren play in that? They certainly have built the kind of offense that would lead you to believe that they're going to have to lean heavily on the run because, a 4 wide receiver set, you're rolling out Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, rookie Roman Wilson, and George Pickens. I'm not sure that's what Mike Tomlin envisions seeing very often from his team. And I don't know if those high-flying offenses would work very well with the quarterbacks they have, but both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields have shown talent scrambling and running the ball themselves. So that might be, a good factor as well. I just, let's see how the line comes together. Let's see what they get going. I think there's a potential for them with neither quarterback under contract next year and with Harris's contract kind of coming up, that they could look at it and say, this isn't what we want, and make even more wholesale change. I'm not sure they're done changing their offense, if that makes some sense.
Makes perfect sense.
We move on to the fourth place team in the division. Hard to believe they finished in fourth place, but that's what happens when you get racked by injuries. And that was the Cincinnati Bengals. And despite being fourth place, they were 9-8, really respectable and in the playoff hunt all the way through to the end. Key departures: running back Joe Mixon left for the Houston Texans. Tyler Boyd, wide receiver, left for the Tennessee Titans, along with their offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Tight end Irv Smith left and went to the Kansas City Chiefs. DJ Reader, the defensive tackle, departed, and so did safety Nick Scott. Among their additions, they brought in Zach Moss at running back. They brought in Mike Gesicki to add to the tight end room, and they brought in safety Von Bell in the draft. They took tackle Amarius Mims. They got defensive tackle Chris Jenkins, and they got an interesting wide receiver prospect in Jermaine Burton. Fantasy finishes last year: Joe Burrow only played about, I think, 60% of the season. He finished as QB 25, was real slow to start as well, coming back off of some injuries. Jake Browning finished as QB 27, stepping in for Joe Burrow. Joe Mixon finished as running back 6. Chase Brown, as a rookie, finished as running back 63, kind of flashed there the last couple games. By comparison, Moss was running back 31 for the Colts. Jamar Chase finished as wide receiver 11. Tyler Boyd, wide receiver 49. T. Higgins, who missed quite a bit of time with injury, finished as wide receiver 51. At tight end, Tanner Hudson was tight end 27. Drew Sample was tight end 46. Gesicki for the Patriots was tight end 37. Dennis, we think Joe Burrow is back. We're feeling hopeful that he is healthy. Higgins and Chase are there. That's always a good thing. Backfield a little bit in flux. They're missing kind of that established third receiver. What are you feeling for this Bengals offense?
It feels like they're narrowing the funnel, and the funnel is Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Everybody else is going to get scraps, it seems. I know Zach Moss is a 0 RB darling because he does project to be the starting running back, and he looked good in Indianapolis. But let's face it, Zach Moss had several years of not looking good before he did look good. And whether or not that translates to his third team, that's going to be interesting. Chase Brown was explosive. Brown's got decent size. I think he's 5'9", about 209. So he's kind of a rocked up little guy. He's short, not necessarily small, has real good speed. So there may be some concern that, they may have brought Moss in because they're not sure that Chase Brown can handle a big workload. But if I can get 12 to 14 touches out of Brown and 12 to 14 touches out of Moss, Brown's the guy I want to roster. He's more explosive. We've seen him break off big passing plays last year. I think he's going to be the cheaper of the two. He kind of, he started off his career with a little bit of fizzle, and then he had a couple games at the end of the year where he popped off. So, they did spend a first-round pick on Amarius Mims, who's backing up Trent Brown at right tackle to start the year. It all comes down, you sit back and you wonder, what would the Bengals 2023 season have been if Joe Burrow had just taken Jamar Chase's advice and sat out the first 4 games? Would that have
probably would have been a big difference?
It's like, I know you can't predict injuries, and I'm sure you've seen the butterfly effect, and going back and trying to do that doesn't mean something else wouldn't have happened. to Burrow later in the season when he injured his hand or wrist. But they've got the pieces in place to be a throwing team. I'm not sold on Mike Gesicki any more than I was sold on Irv Smith. But I also don't think Drew Sample and Tanner Hudson are the answer. This almost feels like let's wait a couple years for Eric Hall to take over before the tight end is anything you're really looking at. Honestly, Mike Gesicki, if I'm rostering one of their tight ends, it's probably Gesicki, and it's probably one of my last one or two positions on my roster. More than happy to cut him for whatever hot waiver wire pickup happens, even in Dynasty. It really, the creme de la creme of this offense is Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Higgins wants a long-term deal. He's not going to get it from the Bengals, and I think they've come to an understanding that that's not going to happen. They drafted Jermaine Burton, and I think a lot of people expected him to slide into the Tyler Boyd role, but our lads has him backing up T. Higgins, so maybe they're having him understudy to take over for Higgins next year. But they've got Trenton Irwin listed. Charlie Jones is the backup in the slot there. So those two guys, we saw it with Tyler Boyd. If Higgins and Chase are healthy, that position isn't going to get a lot of run. So I think what the Bengals have done is they've prioritized where they want their playmakers. And right now it's the two outside guys. They're not concerned with the slot. To me, the real question is going to be, will either of the running backs give them the pass receiving ability that Joe Mixon did?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say I haven't given up hope that they'll get a longer-term deal with T. Higgins. There have been rumblings that they're still talking. I mean, we'll have to see. I think the Bengals would be better long-term if they had those two guys, especially since it feels like they've decided to go low cost everywhere else on offense. They aren't splashing out huge contracts to get the best offensive linemen. They certainly have just tried to pick up guys at tight end, and it feels like they've done that a little bit, looked for deals at running back. So it would make some more sense if they were able to get Higgins, but we know he'll be there this year. I do like both him and Jamar Chase this year. Hopefully Burrow will snap back. He got injured in week 11, so he didn't play that entire game. As Dennis noted, first 4 weeks of the season were a little bit rough for Burrow. He had 3.2, 16.4, 9.2, 4.7 points per game in those 4 weeks, but he was picking it up when it came back. Then he had 24.4, 14.8, 27.6, 22.3, 21.9, kind of developing into what we were expecting. If you look at that stretch, he was QB 17 heading into week 11 cumulatively. Looked like he was bouncing back maybe toward a low-end QB1 finish when he kind of got knocked out. I'm hoping he bounces back to where we expected him, a solid QB1, which I think will be good for both Chase and Higgins. Chase finishing as wide receiver 11 is probably somewhat of a reflection of their diminished passing game, because Higgins, his finish is largely due to getting injuries. Tyler Boyd kind of was what he was. You mentioned running back. That is a question. You're talking about draft capital. Right now, Chase Brown carries an ADP of running back 37. Zach Moss, not as high as you think, carries an ADP of running back 27. Moss is 26. He's only 26 years old, 5'10", 215. Chase Brown is 24. He's 5'10", 211. They're not that much different in age and in physicality. We liked what we saw, but it was a real small sample size for Chase Brown. Joe Mixon, as I noted going through here, finished as running back 6, and that was largely thanks to volume. So the question is probably who gets volume. Moss, you're correct. We did not see in 2.5 years in Buffalo much out of him. And last year, he really got an opportunity because Jonathan Taylor was out for a while. From week 2 to week 8, he was the starter there. And during that 7-game stretch, he averaged 15.6 points per game and was running back 4 over that stretch. It's a small sample, but that's, I think, if you were hoping to catch fire, that's probably where it would be. Running back 27 is not incredibly cheap, nor is it overly ambitious if you think he can get to middle running back 2 territory. And I think potentially with volume, he could. I feel like Chase Brown's RB37 is probably a little bit closer to where I think he'll finish. I think they brought Moss in for a reason and then decided that it was fine to let Joe Mixon go. And he's the one that I prefer to bet on. But again, it depends on the cost. Like if people are drafting him in your draft as like the 10th or 11th running back off the board, you're welcome to him. If I can get him, between running back 16 and 20, I'm going to take that shot. And if I can get him lower than that, I'm really going to take that shot. Where I'm most excited about having him is places where he's like my RB3. So there's some potential to throw him up in there, but I have some other guys where I have one roster where I have a really strong RB1, and then I have both Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, which I think are guys that could both have an opportunity to get some volume and be producers and could be kind of interchangeable and fungible in my RB2 flex areas. So that's kind of my hopes for that backfield.
I'm just curious. I'm looking at our dynasty startup we did to see. Let's see. Zach Moss went the 9th pick in the 10th round. This will be some exciting.
I'm pretty sure I have him.
2, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17.
I'm pretty sure it's this team that I was remembering. Yes, it's our dynasty startup. I took Jonathan Taylor, and then I have Moss, Singletary, and Gus Edwards.
Looks like he was about RB30 in that draft.
Which, I'm fine in that. I took him. I took Singletary. I took Gus Edwards. I waited a little bit on a second running back after I got Jonathan Taylor. And I took other positions. We have tight end premium. I took Kelsey and Kincaid, and I had taken Garrett Wilson, got Evans and Cooper. I waited a little bit on running back, but I have like him between him, Singletary, and Gus Edwards. I'm going to have guys that are playable that are probably leads and getting some volume every week.
So he went at the 10:09. So Najee Harris went at the 10:01. Aaron Jones at 10:06. Then Zach Moss at 10:09. Jalen Warren 10:10 immediately after. Ty Spears at 10:12. Devin Singletary at 11:04. James Conner 11:09. Blake Corum 11:10. And Eckler. So, Kamara and Zamir White went in the 9th round. So there's, I think he probably has reasonable upside. Like if he comes out and finishes as RB24 this year, I think he'll be the starting running back in Cincinnati next year. Can he hold it another year at Chase Brown? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that, he's started to improve. He's doing that kind of Raheem Mostert career is what he's doing without the explosive speed.
Well, but Chase Brown also, it's not like he was an incredibly highly rated prospect coming out. Moss was a pretty decently rated prospect taken in the 3rd round, which, given the way running backs go, is not bad draft capital. Chase Brown went 163 overall in the 5th round. He was a little bit of an older running back coming out as well. He played for Pitt and Illinois, played 5 seasons in college, had a couple of decent years for Illinois there at the end. Be curious to see. Like I said, we saw a couple of flashes, but they're not physically. They're pretty much the same. They're both 5'10", one's 215, one's 211, so not a big difference. And there's not a huge difference in their ages, even though Zach Moss has been in the league for a few seasons, because Moss was younger coming out. Chase Brown was a 23-year-old rookie. So we'll see. There's potential in the backfield. I don't know if I would feel great trying to bet on either one of them to put up Joe Mixon's numbers. I think there'll be more of a split than there was. Mixon got a ton of volume, which is what really helped him go to an RB6 range.
So athletically, they're not comparable at all. Chase Brown is substantially more athletic. Zach Brown had a 3.16 relative athletic score. Chase Brown had a 9.80. Almost the exact same height, 5'9" and a quarter for, or 5'9" and a half for Chase Brown, 5'9" and 3/8 for Zach Moss. Moss is an eighth of an inch shorter. Moss was 223 coming in. Brown was 209. Brown outbenched him 25-19, but Brown ran a 4.43 and Moss ran a 4.65. Brown had a 40-inch vertical to Moss's 33-inch vertical. After that, they didn't do the same things. But Brown, as his 40 time would suggest, had much better splits at 10 and 20 yards as well. So, I think they can be complementary backs. I think Moss is going to provide probably a little bit more power, being a few pounds heavier. And Brown will provide a little bit more explosiveness. And in this day and age, I think there's 5 or 6 true bell cow backs in the league now. So this seems like a pretty good tandem, very similar to, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, where it gets sketchy is if it becomes a 3-headed monster or a 4-headed monster. If there's 2 guys, I think I can reasonably predict productivity out of them. And so if I'm looking at probably the next hang up I would have then would be volume overall in the running game, because Joe Burrow is a gunslinger and he wants to throw it, and he's got Chase and Higgins, and he could go nuts and throw it 650 times, which takes 75 or so carries away that these guys are going to be splitting. So that's probably my next biggest concern. But I think the value is there for both of these backs right now.
Well, and I think it'll be curious too how if the offense changes with Brian Callahan moving on. They threw it 615 times last year, but as we mentioned, Joe Burrow was injured at the beginning and out. 2022, when Burrow was in there, though, he only threw it 606 times in 16 games that he started. So Mixon.
Do you know about this new OC?
No, I don't even remember who they have, but I think
Dan Pitcher. Let me see. All right, I'll go to his.
It feels like Zach Taylor is probably the offensive architect there anyway.
Right. So Pitcher has been with the Bengals since 2016. Started out as an offensive assistant. Then he was the assistant quarterbacks coach in 2019, quarterbacks coach in 2020 to 2023, and now the offensive coordinator. So he's been there all of Zach Taylor's career. Looks like. So if he's been there,
pre-existed, Zach Taylor. Yeah. So it looks like he's mostly worked with quarterbacks, which is good. I think the question is who is going to be the play caller. I don't
think Taylor's given that up. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like that's Zach Taylor, and if that's the case, it looks like that they have had about 300 carries and about 600 to 650 pass attempts the last few years. So, depends on what the split is there, to see. Joe Mixon had 257 last year, had 210 the year before. I like that as volume if that's what Moss gets kind of as the lead. Samaje Perine was pretty playable in 2022 when he was there. He got 95 carries. You could see a split there, something like that. That would be a pretty good step up for Chase Brown, who saw about 40 carries as a rookie. So. Well, Dennis, every year we have one team that goes from worst to first in their division. It feels almost like a cheat to have the Bengals in this position, similar to how I believe Baltimore was in this position last year. But I think the Bengals, with Burrow staying healthy, can win 12 games and win the AFC North again. How are you feeling about the Bengals?
I have them at 11 games and winning the AFC North. I don't think 12 is out of the question. If health plays right and the defense plays right, Lou Anarumo has been a phenomenal defensive coordinator, in my opinion. It felt like when he was hired, it was like nobody wanted the job. You've got this young offensive mind coming in to be the head coach from the Sean McVay tree. And, it was just like he kind of got crapped on for the first couple of years. And Anarumo's done a great job with the defense. So if that defense keeps coming to play, the offense stays healthy. I think they have a lot of upside. Will they make it deep in the playoffs? I don't know. I've got them at the 4. So, they're getting a wild card game at least. And I don't know. I like the Bengals. I think they've got a lot of fantasy relevant players. High-end guys, they've got 2, and that's Burrow and Chase. I do think Higgins is probably a mid – he's probably a top 20 receiver himself. But I think I'm not going out on a limb for who's the other guy, Trenton Irwin or Jermaine Burton this year. I mean, could Burton, make a push and grab the slot job? He could. I just don't know how many targets are going to be there for whoever gets it. And if I remember, I think Trenton Irwin, let me look real quick. Yeah, so he's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's your typical slot blocking wide receiver, a la Noah Brown.
Well, I think as long as Higgins stays healthy, he's going to be pushing. If he doesn't get a long-term deal done, he's playing on the franchise tag. I think both those guys are going to want to show out. And we've seen pairs of wide receivers in good schemes. Philadelphia and Miami put up numbers. I think they could do the same thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that'll do it for us today. And as a wrap on the AFC North, we'll be back next week with everyone's favorite division, the NFC South, on Tuesday. That means the top 2 teams, and I say top loosely, but that would be the Buccaneers and the Saints. And then on Friday, we'll be looking at the Falcons and the Panthers. So that's something for you to look forward to. Dennis, if people have a lot of time on their hands this long holiday weekend, what can they do?
We got lots of content. They can go to their favorite podcast platform, hit that search button, go to the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, hit that subscribe, hit that like button, get us moving back up the charts. We love to be loved. We're going to be looking for some people to join our redraft league here soon. And just a heads up, I don't have Cole's playoff schedule for next week, so there is a chance we might push some game times back. He's got a makeup game on Sunday. I don't know if the
rare Sunday game,
the playoffs are going to if they're going to wait till the makeup games are done, or if they're going to put the tournament schedule out ahead of time. But so there may be. I'll keep you as soon as I know. You'll know.
Well, there'll be something to look forward to, and next week the NFC South powerhouse of all divisions. So until then, you guys stay safe and enjoy this holiday weekend. Even you out there, England.
Someone's got to